Off actually by recording in progress. Got it. I wanted to start off actually with just a brief introduction of myself. I am a physics professor at Pomona College. I've been at Pomona for about 8 or 9 years now. And before that, I was at Mount Holyoke College, which is one of the historic women's colleges on the East Coast for 15, 16 years. And I have to say, I love being a small liberal arts college professor. This is my dream job, come to life. I also wanted to briefly introduce Professor Warren Liu, who's on this call as well. He is an English professor at Scripps College and is also one of the faculty co-directors at the CTL. And he has graciously offered to help support this workshop because I find it very difficult to walk and chew gum at the same time, particularly on Zoom.
Hi, folks.
All
it's
right.
great to see you all.
I am going to go ahead and share my screen and let's jump into this. Here we go. Got to remember all these good skills before classes start. Okay, I actually wanted to start off by acknowledging that I think there's actually a lot of collective expertise in this room. I think many of us have been working pretty hard on trying to think about how to make our classes more equitable over the past few years. So I was hoping with this workshop that maybe we could work collectively on starting off by trying to put together a model of what equitable STEM teaching looks like. I'll offer you a quick sort of framing and some ideas that I've thought about, but then I'm gonna turn it over to the group and see if we can't construct a model together. Because I'm sure there are many things for all of us to learn from each other. After that, I'd like to segue into talking about specific strategies and resources for how we might implement some of the ideas in this model of equitable STEM teaching. And then I want to save the last half to a third of the class or the workshop to think about some individual course development. I am sure that, like me, all of you are frantically thinking about your spring courses right now. And so I would really like us to walk away from this workshop with something concrete, at least having roughed out an idea for something we could do and implement immediately in these spring semester courses. All right, so with that in mind, I wanted to start by thinking about trying to build a model of what an equitable STEM classroom might look like. And I'm going to share a couple slides with you, and then we'll move to thinking about this more collectively. So I wanted to start off with a framing that I actually got from a CTL talk that I attended maybe a year ago by Professor Kaiser from Pitzer College. Professor Kaiser showed me this graphic here, which really helped me with some sort of making sense of the sorts of things I've been thinking about. And so this graphic comes from work by Dr. Bev Tatum, where Dr. Tatum talks about systemic racism as a moving sidewalk that we're all standing on. So you're standing on this moving sidewalk and it's moving along to the left. And you sort of have 3 choices as to what you can do. You can be actively racist and run along in the same direction as the sidewalk, but you know, nobody wants to be that guy. Then there's this other sort of middle category of passive racism, which is what happens if you do nothing, right? If you just stand on this sidewalk and let it carry you along. Or the third option is to try and be anti-racist and run in the opposite direction as fast as you can, right? So I've been using this model sort of in my head to think about my courses since seeing this. And as I think about this model, you know, as I think about sort of STEM teaching in general, I think in STEM, we've done a pretty good job of really thinking about equality, of really working hard to make sure that all the students in our classes have access to the same opportunities and resources. But you know, what I've slowly sort of come to understand over the past few years is that that notion of equality is a form of passive racism, because it ignores all those structural factors in our classrooms, and it ignores the bias and privilege that students are bringing with them into class, and that indeed is sort of embedded into our teaching. And for me, I think this was reflected in, for a long time, I was sort of subscribing to this idea of like, this is a physics class and I should focus on the physics. Right? I think that is sort of embodies this unwittingly passive racism that I was bringing into my classes. And so what I want to argue as we think about how to move towards more equitable teaching, I want to argue that we should be using an anti-racist framework. And by an anti-racist framework, what I mean is we should be actively thinking about, in our classrooms, identifying and challenging sources of racism, really thinking about the systems and organizational structure of our classes, what we're doing that's feeding into this systemic racism and ways to disrupt it, so that we can sort of redistribute power in the classroom in a more equitable manner. All right, so that moving sidewalk idea and this sort of anti-racist framework is what I'm using to try and sort of model for myself what I think an equitable STEM classroom might look like. So I tried to take that fundamental idea and boil it down to sort of some more concrete points that I could work from. And this is what I've come up with for myself so far. So I've translated that idea of a really actively equitable STEM classroom into 4 main points. One, that we need to really think about representation in our course materials. Really think about, if I'm only teaching the work of white male physicists, what message am I sending the students? That one, I think, is fairly straightforward. The next one is, I think in the classroom, we need to be really thinking about how we're going to affirm the individual identities of our students, to see them as people, not just cogs in the classroom, right? And part of affirming their identities is also acknowledging the realities of the different forms of bias and privilege that are going on in our classrooms. The third pillar is trying to really shift our pedagogies themselves, or our teaching methods themselves, away from this sort of, I think conventionally STEM classrooms have been taught with this sort of meritocracy view to them, where we think, okay, we'll do homework and exams and the best students will rise to the top and get A's. And so I would argue that the third thing we need to be working on is really shifting away from those sorts of teaching methods to ones that are much more collaborative and actively inclusive. Such as, for example, the sorts of things Jorge was talking about earlier in the day. And then the fourth part of this, or the fourth pillar in my mind, is also working to empower our students and ourselves to really go out there and make change, to make change in the classroom, to use their science to do good, to address those different forms of bias and privilege, and try and see ourselves not just as victims of them, but as active participants in them. So those are sort of the 4 main pieces that I think about when trying to construct my classes in an equitable manner. But I also want to acknowledge there's probably pieces missing here. So I want to take a moment and just sort of collectively brainstorm, because I know a bunch of you are thinking about this. I want to do a collective brainstorming exercise for a moment about what else should be in this model. So I am going to stop sharing my screen in a minute, and I'm going to give you a Jamboard link and ask you to start trying to fill in some additional ideas here. I feel like I have been talking a lot, so I'm just going to take a quick minute to check in with you guys. Thumbs up, thumbs down, how are you doing? Okay. I had this big worry, I can't see you while I'm sharing my screen. I had this moment of like, maybe I forgot to unmute or something, but we're good. Okay. I am going to put this Jamboard link in if I can just grab it here. And I'm going to ask you all to move over to the Jamboard with me, so we can do a little brainstorming. Okay, there it is. It's in the chat. And let's spend about 5 minutes just sort of filling in. You should be able to see a front page that's got that model I just showed you. And I'm going to ask you to use sticky notes to sort of try and flesh that model out. What pieces you think should be added to this. And here I'm going to ask you to think about sort of very like high level. what are the sort of high level ideals that should be in a model like this? And later on, we're going to fill in like the specifics of how you might do these things. Mm. I have a question which I actually added to somebody's sticky note. What is OER? Can you just spell that out? It's probably obvious, but I'm missing it. This is great. All right, this is already affirming for me. What I see as, like, I always think doing these workshops or giving talks like this is a great way for me to learn all sorts of new things. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, oh yeah, look at that. These are some great ideas. So I'm going to suggest, why don't we try and group these ideas? I think some of these ideas maybe intersect with some things already in the blue squares. And then some of them are definitely not already in there, but over like multiple of the sticky notes are sort of talking about community, for example. Why don't we try and sort of group some of these ideas a little and see if we can't narrow this down into, maybe no more than 4 additional things to add to this model, just so it doesn't get too crazy. But if you would drag sticky notes around and try and organize them a little, that would be awesome. So why don't we try using a pink sticky note to see if we can label any of these sort of groups as something else that should be in the blue model. Like the easy one is build community. That seems like a pretty straightforward one. Do any of the rest of these form sort of a standalone pillar by themselves? All right, somebody's got to unmute themselves because this is driving me crazy. I'm looking at this Jamboard and I see so far there's one pink sticky note that we ought to add build community to this blue model. The rest of the sticky notes seem to me like they're sort of clustered around things that are already in the model, but I'm not sure if that's accidental. So
I
either
think
add
for
some
me,
more pink sticky notes
it's a
or talk
little
to me.
hard to kind of, it seems like there's a lot behind each one of these notes, and it's hard for me to really integrate what everything implies. So I think that's why I personally am having trouble coming up with summaries of some of these things.
Okay, I added build community to this blue model on the slide deck, which I'll put back up in a sec. Anything else? Pink sticky it if you think something else rises to the sort of big level and it ought to be in our meta level model. I have to say, I love build community and feeling a little chagrined that I didn't have it in there.
So I think there is something, sorry, I'll turn on my camera. Because I'm not quite sure, like, I'm actually not sure what metacognitive equity in the hidden curriculum means. And so I'm not quite sure how that overlaps with some of the others, but I think there's something else about sort of planning your course intentionally around things other than the content in terms of other learning goals. Like, so the one I put up there was, I lost it now. Focusing on things like study skills and introductory courses, or things that move beyond just the content and the material, but help students develop as students. And I'm not quite sure that fits in your original 4.
Okay, good. Should we make that a pink one?
Is it like the hidden vocabulary, right? The idea that if you say office hours, some students really think that means when you're in your office doing research. And so you have to either tell them that it's like not just office hours, like I changed it to student consulting hours or open hours. It's that kind of like the hidden language that if you don't have parents or other people who have told you like this is, oh, you should just go ask the professor for an extension. Oh, you should just do this, like making it that transparency of what you're doing. Kind of like someone had where they said, you know, transparency in teaching decisions, like really saying this is why we do this and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's some of it. But I don't know if that then also fits under just addressing bias and privilege, because some students come in knowing what office hours mean and others don't. But it's also, I mean, I think in biology, whatever I teach in the intro course, they're going to forget by the end of the summer. But if I teach them how to study for an exam, they're going to take that into their next course. And so that, I mean, I think that's maybe the distinction I was trying to make.
Okay. Sarah, I tried to add that to our blue model, which you'll see in a minute. If I've gotten it wrong, correct me. All right. I I then am going to return to those slides. I'm gonna have to get smoother at this before next week. Let's see, here it is. Okay, so I have tried to add what I think we just talked about to our model. I'm gonna pause for just a minute, and if you feel like I've misrepresented something, jump in, please. Okay, I'm gonna go with, I did a good job. So if we think of this then as our sort of collective model of what the main aspects of an actively inclusive STEM classroom should include, then what I'd like to do next is move towards actually trying to flesh those ideas out with specific strategies for how would you accomplish these things, and or links to different resources, because of course there's just a wealth of things out there these days. So I am going to suggest, I'm going to just show you a couple of examples of the sorts of things I mean, and then we'll go back to the Jamboards again for some sort of collective work. As I look at this model we just put together, the representation in course materials I feel like is fairly straightforward. We know what we need to do there. This number 3 one, the collaborative, actively inclusive teaching methods, I actually think the rest of this teaching tune-up, the other workshops and lunchtime discussion were beautiful models of this sort of thing. How do you shift your teaching around to a model that really emphasizes helping students to work together and to thrive together and all learn together? So I think the 1 and 3 have been pretty well covered. I'm going to focus here on 2 and 4. An example of one possible way to work on addressing bias and privilege and affirming identity, and then another example of how to empower students and ourselves to go out there and actually make a difference. So for my first example, I'm focusing here on the pillar about affirming identity and addressing bias and privilege. So the example I want to share with you is an equity in physics curriculum that I developed actually as part of my sophomore level physics course. This is a gateway course into the physics major. All of our physics majors take this. And the class is nominally about quantum mechanics. So in addition to the quantum mechanics, I have added to the weekly homeworks a curriculum that really for the first half of the semester seeks to define and have students engage with what various types of bias and privilege in the field look like. So the topics we cover are implicit bias, imposter syndrome, stereotype threat, microaggressions, structural racism, and white supremacy. And each week we tackle a different one of these. And the curriculum around this basically goes with, as part of the homework, I ask students to do a reading or watch a video on the topic of the week, and then to post to a discussion forum, just up on Sakai, responses to 4 different question prompts. The first prompt is, what did you learn from the reading? What were the sort of major highlights for you? And then the second 2 prompts are really aimed at trying to get students to engage personally with the topic. So I first ask them to relate the topic to their own lived experience. And then second, to relate the topic to physics, or if they can, even to our classroom. So for example, microaggressions, where are they showing up in our classroom? Where do they show up in your life? I try and take these things from being these sort of theoretical ideas to forcing students to engage with them on a personal level. And then the 4th prompt is actually something that the students themselves asked me to include, which is asking students to think about how they can make a difference. All right, we talk about structural racism. That seems like this big problem, like how do you wrestle with it? students wanted a chance to think constructively about ways that they could work to disrupt these things. So that's the fourth topic. And then finally, after the students do this work in the background as part of their homework, this class has a long afternoon lab attached to it. We break up the lab midway. Pre-pandemic, we would have coffee and cookies, and we would have a discussion about this topic. So that is one possible example of a way in which to address bias and privilege in the classroom. We're really talking openly about these things. And at the same time, really affirming students' individual identities in ways that say, I see you and I understand. We see you and we understand what's happening in this classroom, or at least we see some of the dynamics that are happening in this classroom. In terms of the fourth pillar around empowering students and ourselves to make change, the example I'd offer here is actually the second half of that same equity in physics curriculum, so same quantum mechanics course. For the second half of the semester, we segue into a project assignment. So I ask students to work with a partner on a project aimed at making a positive change in the department, addressing one of the topics that we've discussed so far, meaning the bias and privilege curriculum. So students work on those projects together for 5 to 6 weeks. And then at the end of the semester, they present their work in a STEM equity symposium. And actually, I want to credit Jorge, who is on this call, Jorge Moreno. This was his idea. It started off as the Decolonizing Physics and Astronomy Symposium and has grown outwards to include some other disciplines. But Jorge and I have collaborated on this together from the start. So Jorge's class is also participating in this. And our students together present posters about the sorts of things they've done. So to give you just a quick sense of what those projects look like, here's a sample of 3 of them. So the one in the middle is actually a piece of original artwork by one of my modern physics students, who is also studying art major. And she's really working on addressing sort of whose work is represented in the classroom here, right? The project on the right, the hashtag I2M project, was done by a young African-American woman in my class who went around and interviewed fellow students of color in the science departments at Pomona and asked them, what one thing would you want to tell your professors and classmates? And got this just really deep sort of trying to think of what even the adjective is, but sort of transforming for me set of quotes from these students. And then the final example at the bottom is one from this year where a couple of students took on thinking about mental health in the field and how we can better support them. Those are just 3 examples out of many, many, many. Jorge and I have been doing this for 5 or 6 years now. If you're interested in seeing more of those projects, I put a spatial chat link up here. Last year, we were forced to do this online. The only good thing about it is we now have a nice little showcase of the posters. All right, so those are 2 possible examples of things one can do in their classroom. And I offer these only as a way of just sort of getting the thinking started. So what I'd like to do at this point is segue back to that Jamboard and ask you guys to sort of flesh out those pillars that we came up with in the model with ideas, links to resources, that kind of stuff, so that we have a collective resource to use going forward. So if you would just go back to the Jamboard, you will see that there's a separate slide for each of these blue pillars. And I'm asking you to just go to town, throw sticky notes up there about ideas, give us some hyperlinks, that kind of stuff. I see all kinds of great ideas coming up here, including a few I'm really eager to go look up after this. There was one I saw about 10 things to talk with your first gen students about. Simple strategies, week by week resource for teaching first year and first generation students. I'm totally looking that up as soon as I get out of here. Would you feel like you've sort of had enough? Give me a thumbs up, like put the little thumbs up sign on your window. Thumbs are going up and down. Do these things have an expiration date on them? Is that the deal? Okay. Then I think I have seen a thumbs up from most of you. Things you learn. Okay. Let me go back then. I'm going to make sure that you have a link to all these different documents when you head out of here. So you will have this document as a resource, the Jamboard. Okay, so back to the slides. I am hoping at this point, so we have developed a sort of high-level model of what an equitable STEM classroom might involve. We've fleshed out on the Jamboard some strategies and resources and a whole bunch of in particular resources to go look at for each of those. What I would like to do at this point is shift gears towards the individual course development piece. And what I mean by this is, the spring semester is breathing down our necks. I would like you to be able to walk away from this workshop with at least roughed out some idea of, okay, here's something I could do that sort of fits within this model of equitable STEM teaching. Here is one small thing I could plug into my spring course and use right away. So I would encourage you, as you think about this, to think think modestly at this point, obviously, because we are hitting the ground running in 5 days, right? But invariably, amongst those like 7 or 8 ideas, sort of meta things we outlined, there ought to be some small little piece that each of us can sort of plug in the spring to our courses. So that's what I'm hoping we can work on next. What I would like to do is send you guys into smaller breakout rooms to work on this. And I'll try to organize you a little bit by what you're interested in working on. So I wanted to pause for just a minute and ask you to add to your Zoom name a number that matches sort of which of these pillars you're interested in. And I can never remember how to do that on the fly. So I looked it up and I put instructions on how to change your Zoom name in the gray box on this slide. So if you would take a minute to update your name with your preference of which topic, then Warren's going to help out with sorting.
I'm a bit confused about what hidden curriculum is. Could you clarify that for me?
I think the idea of the hidden curriculum is all these things that we, because we're on the inside of college, sort of take for granted, like office hours. Well, what is office hours? And are you supposed to go to them? Do you need to make an appointment? Or, oh, the writing center. Do you have to pay to get help at the writing center? Like all these sort of hidden assumptions. I think that's what it refers to. And if I'm wrong, somebody please unmute yourself and jump in. Okay, so while Warren is sorting people into breakout rooms, I am hoping you're changing your names. I am not able to see that. So if there's a problem with that, somebody please tell me. Okay, while Warren's getting people sorted, let me just give you the instructions for the breakout room. So my hope is the sort of goal of this time in the breakout rooms is to rough out a plan for something that you're going to implement in the coming semester. So what I'd like you to do in particular is to start off with just having a quick, like 1 minute per person and no more, share out of what each person in your breakout room wants to work on. And then switch to using the time to go through a guiding worksheet that I'm about to give you to sort of rough out a plan for something you want to do in the spring. And it may be that everybody in your breakout room is doing the same thing and you want to rough this out together, or it might be that you want to work individually on that, sort of your call. And then the idea is that we'll come back to the main room at 2:20, 2:25, something like that, to have just a sort of lightning round of share outs about what we're working on. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to put a bunch of these instructions in the chats that you've got them. And then when Warren is ready, we will send you to your breakout rooms. But let me get this in the chat first. Where did the chat go? There it is.
Hi, Janice, just really quickly, there's a couple folks, there's actually at least 3 folks who are in their own number in terms of the topics that of interest. So I don't know, should I go ahead? Do you want me to go ahead and just group those folks together, or I can say who they are right now? Just FYI, topics 1, 3, and 6 are populated with at least 2 or 3 people. And then the other folks, topics 5, 7, and 8 have 1 person each. And so I don't know if that's going to be a useful breakout room for those individuals.
Warren, can you remind us of which rooms have multiple people in them?
Right now, topic 1 and topic 3 both have, and 6, sorry, forgive me. 1, 3, and 6.
All right, I'll screen share again so that you can see what those are. But if you're not in 1, 3, or 6, you might think about whether you want to change your number. Or if you don't, just leave it as it is and hang out, and we'll talk once we send everybody else off to breakout rooms about how you want to do this.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to share briefly the screen again, just so you guys can see what these numbers are. So 1, representation; 3, the inclusive teaching methods; and 6, transparency, openness, and accountability. I guess those rooms all have multiple people.
Is it possible to pick the option where we can just pick the breakout rooms ourselves? So that way, if you're alone, you can switch to one with other people if you want. It's okay if it's not Warren. I'm totally fine.
I'm gonna click on this little button that says allow participants to choose
Yeah.
room, and then
go.
I'm gonna open all rooms, and let's just run this as an experiment. If you run into any problems, I will be here.
Okay, before you go though, I have one other thing to give you. So the link I just posted is to the sort of meta document where all the different pieces to this workshop are linked up. In there, you'll see a guiding worksheet link. That's what I want you to use. Yeah. So the first thing I sent you was the share with each other what you want to work on and work on the worksheet. And the second thing is where you can find the worksheet. All right, so head out to the breakout rooms and I'll call you back with like 5 or 10 minutes to spare.
All right, I'm gonna open the rooms now. Please stick around if you have any problems. Okay, it looks like folks are in their rooms. And yeah, we have just FYI, Janice, there's 3 folks in it. So breakout room, unfortunately, topic 3, there's 5 folks in that one. So a little bit, couple more folks. I wasn't able to I wasn't able to limit the number per room, sorry. But there's 3 active, sorry, there's 3 active topics being discussed. Topics 1, topic 3, and topic 6.
Perfect. Thank you, Warren.
Sure,
I
no
don't know
problem.
how I would have managed this without
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, the breakout room function is really the least intuitive function on Zoom. It could be better, I agree. And I'll pause the recording while they're in the breakout rooms.
Okay, while we're waiting for the others, it's truth time. Were you able to actually work on those worksheets, or was it conversation instead?
We did a little of both. I do like the worksheet. I like that. I also like that at the very bottom, it has, you know, someone who's going to check up on you. Like, accountability. I think that's really important.
Yes. That was actually one of a couple of people put up accountability sticky notes earlier. I thought that was, yes.
Yeah.
All right, looks like we are back. So we have about 10 minutes left, or 9 minutes left. I was hoping we might just do a quick little popcorn around the room. I'd love to hear from each of you, sort of like 30 seconds to 1 minute. What are you working on, and do you foresee any major challenges? And then maybe you can popcorn it over to somebody else. Sarah, let's start with you.
Sure. So I
Oh,
can.
we have two Sarahs.
We
There
have
we
two.
go.
I figured I'd just go ahead. Yeah, so I teach data science, and so I had talked about trying to incorporate some better data sets into what I'm teaching. And the main barrier is really the time. It takes time to go and research and find the data sets to use in my teaching as I teach students to work with data science. And so we had talked about sort of not being overly ambitious and not trying to redo the whole course at once, but trying to each semester replace a few, and to set aside some specific time each week to look into that. So to have some scheduled time where that is the purpose of that time, not for other general teaching stuff.
That is great. It was one of the best piece of advice I got as a new faculty member was somebody said, don't overhaul the whole thing at once. Pick one little thing each semester. Oh, and who are you gonna popcorn off to?
Oh, I'll go to the other Sarah.
Okay, we were in the same group, and so we both had sort of the same goals as just diversifying our curriculum. So I'm teaching a upper division biology course where we read published papers, and I'm gonna make an effort to actually diversify that list of papers instead of focusing on how well the topic matches the rest of the course, also thinking about who did the research as a way to kind of a small way to move forward in that area.
That's awesome.
So, and I guess I'll pass it on to Elise, who was also in our group.
So yeah, thank you. Carrying along with that theme of trying to make some small changes, since often it's time that's a limiting factor. I'm teaching an ornithology class for the first time, which is the study of birds. And the field is dominated by discoveries of white men. So also trying to diversify that, and also acknowledging, I guess, that and what else we might know about birds if the field had been more diverse. So just having that as a conversation kind of from the beginning. And I had another idea and I forgot, and there's a Zoom band lesson going on behind me, so I will mute myself. I will pass to Sadie.
All right, so I was in the transparency, openness, and accountability group. And so one of the things that I'm hoping is that in the upcoming semester, I'm going to try ungrading. So what I was thinking about is how to introduce this to the students and how to talk to them about it and get buy-in. And like the reason I'm doing it is because I'm teaching a particular section for majors where they always try really hard and always do really well. And I just want to like take the pressure off with regard to grades and really let them like focus on learning. They'll also be doing some research, and I want them to feel able to take risks and things like that. So Mike, who is in my group, suggested with talking to them about it, kind of talking about the research that has been done on ungrading and the benefits and the data that exists. So I think that was a helpful suggestion and one of the things I'm going to try to do. And I'll pass it over to Mike, who is in my group.
Yes, I was also in the transparency, openness, and accountability. And yeah, I guess my main interest is there is that I feel like it gives students the syllabus, but like sometimes students can be afraid to ask questions and don't understand things. And like, it feels like there's this like, black box in there. And we're talking about ways how we can like make the expectations more open, more transparent. And Sadie talked to me about some interesting ideas about how making like reading the syllabus potentially joint activity where people feel more comfortable asking questions, even potentially using tools like Perusal to post that there as a reading and let people like annotate it and discuss some of like their questions and concerns that way. And I think that could be really helpful with that. All right, I guess I'll pass it on to Suri.
Hi, everyone. I think I was in the collaborative and inclusive teaching practices group, and I'm teaching on majors this semester, and I'm building my syllabus to avoid it being too lecture heavy. and to focus it on students to make the topics more accessible to them. And this morning I attended a workshop on essays, which is anything but an essay writing. And I have a final essay on my syllabus. So I'm thinking about changing that to having essays, and there to pair up students or to have students in small groups so that they can collaborate on one of the topics of their choice and to work on it through the semester and have enough chances to talk to each other and group work and all of that. So hopefully that works.
Wow, that's pretty neat.
Thank you. Oh, and I will pass it on to Christina.
Hello, same general group. I'm doing a Calc 1 course, which is one of those kind of introductory mathematics courses. So it's a variety of different students with a lot of different background skill sets. And so what I was working on was really trying to figure out how to make it more collaborative while they're learning, since they all do have different backgrounds. And that's been a thing I found can be a really good strength. And so a lot of times doing worksheets, like how to get them collaborative, but then also how to check in. So trying to maybe institute weekly check-ins to see how it's going and seeing, you know, is this working? And I'm a big fan of Piazza. And so I use that for them to collaborate on homework and stuff where they can post things. And I love it because they can be anonymous to each other, but I can see who it is. And so that way they can feel completely comfortable saying, I have no clue what this problem was asking. Does anybody know? And they can kind of post it. So the Piazza is something I've done before and I like it, but I really want to get them more engaged at the start of the semester. They're kind of slow to do it. So I'm going to see if I can kind of tell them it's like, no, you can really just post the solutions to the homework. It's okay. Just talk. Like, so yeah, but let's see. And then I'll call on Sherry.
Right, yeah, so I was in the same group and I was thinking about ways to get my students to work on more collaborative things than I have in the past. And I think I want to try to get them to do just in-class activities, but working on more application problems where I don't already like know the answer is 3 at the end, where it's more of an open-ended idea that they can work on together. And I have lost track of who's gone, but I don't think Gotham's gone yet. Is that correct?
Hello, I was also in Sherry's group, and one thing I'm interested in working on is team-based lab projects. And one experience I had last semester was most teams got into a good groove, but one did not, where each person was basically went into themselves a little bit. And so I'm kind of curious to how to facilitate group dynamics that don't work out when we have lab groups. And I guess the idea I have is to, well, one thing that worked with that group was for me to sit in and kind of be a member of their group and kind of chime in and maybe give them a sense of support. So I could try doing something like that again as well. Karine.
Thanks. So I'm going to be teaching first year chemistry courses, so the course and the lab as well. And my concerns are a bit in the lab because with the transition to remote learning. But something I was thinking about that we're implementing in the actual course is, so usually when you're in the lab, you can jump around from group to group and ask them what's going on and if they have questions. But I think that's a little bit harder to like jump around from a breakout room or have it even be like a smooth transition where everyone's not kind of just like shocked when the professor walks in. So something that we're doing in the actual course is that there's like a shared Google Doc and everyone in their breakout room has like a few slides. And if they have a question, for example, they'll make their slide color like yellow. And so I will be kind of zoomed out and overlooking everything. And then that'll prompt me to like enter their breakout room, or I can even just type in this document. So I like this idea of, and kind of same with these Jamboards and whatnot, where everyone can kind of see, and it's, I think, an easier way to kind of step back and overlook everything. So I'm looking forward to utilizing that in both settings and see how that works, though I've never done it, but yeah, I'm excited for that.
I'm making a mental note of that when I'm teaching in electronics lab. Did we miss anybody? Okay. So I wanted to wrap up by just saying thank you very much for coming to this workshop and for sort of thinking through these things with me. I feel like I'm actually walking away with some papers I want to go look up and some ideas that I want to use in my class. So thank you very much. I hope this was a good use of an hour and 15 minutes of your time. I know your time is quite valuable. I wanted to remind you to save the link to this document. I'm going to stick it in chat again so that you have it. And then you can access all of the materials from this workshop. I've lost the chat now. Oh, come on. Hang on. There we go. All right, that again is the link to the sort of master document with all the different links. At the bottom of that document is a little feedback link. I would love it if you would just take a few minutes to give me a little feedback on how this workshop went, what was useful, what wasn't, just so if I do this again in the future, I can tweak it. I know I would very much like this to be a constructive use of people's time, so feedback would really help. And the final thing I wanted to say on the way out the door, in addition to thank you, is I am more than happy to continue this conversation one-on-one with departments, with field groups, whatever. So if I can be of any use, reach out. You're welcome to email me. I'll hang on this call for a little bit if you just want to chat now, whatever. But consider the door open. I'm really, really interested in thinking about equitable teaching, as I certainly am hearing the same thing from you all. So if that's a conversation you want to continue, you know where to find me. All right, and don't forget the feedback form. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Gotham.